Alrighty, we are live here with Drew Hollingshead at WSU Coach Drew. If you want to follow him on Twitter, he is Washington State's offensive quality control, and he also helps out with the QBs. And we have him on here for one main goal, to learn more about this air raid offense that's starting to take over the NFL. So, Drew, thanks so much for coming on. How you doing, man?
Doing good, man. I appreciate you having me on and figuring out our scheduled deal. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. Thanks again. We appreciate it. But let's dive right in. So, why did we choose you? Why are you here? Why are you the perfect person to kind of educate our listeners and me and everybody else out there on the air raid offense?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm the perfect person to talk to about it, but I feel like I've got a little bit of expertise. I played at the University of Houston for Coach Kliff Kingsbury and Dana Holgorsen when actually he was the OC there. Was around some of those air raid guys, and coming out of high school, got recruited by Coach Leach, and that's actually kind of how I got this job. Was a little bit of the recognition with the name, and obviously played there at U of H and started my career shortly after I got done playing, and got here at WSU in 2016, and been here ever since. So felt like I've got some skin in the game with the air raid, and I might be able to kind of lend some insight on what's going on with all this stuff for sure.
Awesome. Yeah, you mentioned too, as our listeners would probably recognize, the biggest names with the air raid, Kingsbury, who's now joined the NFL. We're going to dig into him in a little bit. And obviously Mike Leach, maybe the godfather of the air raid, often known as just the complete guru. So can't pick too many better people to learn under. So what's the basic philosophy of this? What are some common staples? Just what is the air raid offense, would you say?
The term gets used widely around college football, I guess, with the prevalence of the spread offense. But really, the air raid is more of a philosophy than anything else. It's about the way we practice. It's about the drills that we incorporate with the plays that we do and the offense that we run, and all of it kind of that blends together. And we all kind of each have our philosophy, and there's plenty of ways to skin a cat, obviously. But this is what we believe in offensively with, some of the stuff people may know as Y cross or four verts and stick and mesh is one of another huge one. So we believe in those core principles. We're not going to do too much, and we're not going to, overload you with a huge playbook, but, we're going to get really good at what we do. And I think the best way I've heard it described, and I kind of tell people this too, is, we're going to keep the playbook pretty simple, but we're going to run it and rep it 1,000 times over, and we're going to get really good at doing it, better than defenses are going to be able to stop it. So that was always the selling point for me, I know, when I was a player, and especially for the guys that run it now.
Absolutely. And you mentioned some of those staples and buzzwords that people maybe have read about, the verts and the mesh and whatnot. Do you mind digging into what some of those entail and what are they designed to kind of do for the offense?
Well, it's, some of that stuff, and I guess most offenses probably have a staple of this, and it was widely, started with the air raid. But a lot of those concepts like Y cross and four verts and mesh and stuff like that people have heard are really good plays to kind of get your athletes in space. Coach Leach talks about this all the time. If he wasn't running the air raid, he'd run the triple option or the veer, because it was about getting people in space, and it's about getting, having the defense to cover all 5 eligible receivers. We'll line up and we'll make you guard not only our 4 receivers, but our running back getting out of the backfield, or line up and empty and make you guard all 5 guys. So it's about getting your best players in space and featuring those guys the best way you possibly can. And a lot of those plays that we have, certainly do a good bit of that.
Awesome. And clearly they've been successful, especially in the college. They've been lighting up college scoreboards for years now. But really, it's taken a while for these concepts to make their way into the NFL. No team's really fully committed to it yet. We're starting to see the concepts slowly get worked in, but why do you think there's this kind of, that's college, it won't work in the pros mentality seems to exist, and do you agree with it?
What I think, and this is just kind of what I believe. I don't necessarily agree with that. I just think the league is such a the coaches that have been in the league have honestly been there for a long time, and it's what they know growing up within the league. A lot of us college guys have been in college football for most of our coaching careers, and I think it's just it's that kind of aspect of those guys know what they know, and they know how the NFL's been run over the last couple decades or so. But like you said, I think the the intrigue with how we've been running offenses in college, especially over the last 5 to 7 years, I think is starting to trickle into the NFL because they see how much success it is, and they see that certain players, not only skill players, but your offensive linemen too, have kind of adapted to what this spread, these spread offenses are doing. And if you're going to draft these guys, why not pick up some of the stuff that they've been doing their whole lives, basically. I always tell people, guys that grew up in Texas, I'm from Texas, guys that grew up in Texas and played high school football in Texas, especially from the early 2000s on to 2018, they've known growing up was the air raid. Now they might not be able to tell you that, and that is specifically the air raid, but Coach Leach's influence, especially when he got to Tech, has infiltrated our state and college football in general for the last couple of decades. So I think you see the NFL getting into it because of the type of players that are coming out now. I think that their skill sets tend to amplify with the things that we're doing, and they're actually, I applaud the NFL for actually getting to it now. So that's been really cool to see.
Absolutely, yeah. It seems like they are finally catching up to speed, and it's working. I mean, Todd Monken, an air raid guru, probably used it more than anyone else in the league. Bucks end up leading the league with 320 passing yards, despite a rotation of Fitzpatrick and Winston. Then you get, Pat Mahomes, and obviously an MVP season. What a ridiculous year this guy has, and Andy Reid definitely worked in some more air raid concepts. So, it might be a long overdue that the air raid made its way into the NFL. Do you sense that it's going to? Do you have a prediction in the way that maybe it will become, full time as it almost is in college in some ways, or do you think it still will be a slow burn for it to really get into there?
You know what? I think it'll be somewhere in between. I think it'll take a little bit to go to really be fully indoctrinated in the NFL, because obviously there is a lot of good stuff that guys like Sean McVay are doing, and obviously Josh McDaniels have been doing some good stuff with Tom Brady for a long time. So I don't know if it's fully going to indoctrinate itself, kind of the way we want as college guys. It'd be really fun to see, but no, it's slowly making its way. And I know guys you picked up concepts here and there. So that's why at least everyone down here and people that know Kliff especially are excited to kind of see what he does with it and see how he takes the offense and kind of molds it into his own, especially with those guys in the NFL. And I think as the years go on, especially if he has some success and the success that Todd Monken had, you'll start to see it more and more. That's for sure.
Awesome. Air raid, it's just, the name suggests how pass happy it is. The QB's, of course, of the utmost importance. So this is kind of a two-parter there. What are some of those crucial traits for a QB to succeed within this scheme?
Well, talking about it from a recruiting standpoint, especially when we're looking at a quarterback, I think the most important thing, and that Coach Leach talks about this all the time, is does he make good decisions, and how do you quantify that? Well, look at his completion percentage. Is he completing 50 to 55% of his balls, or is he completing 65 to 75%? Yeah. What's his touchdown to interception ratio? Does he, is it 4-1 or is it 1-1? I think some of those things are pretty telling, especially because we're going to throw the ball 50 to 60 times in a game, and you want that guy's decision making to be absolute. Now, a lot of that comes from coaching within our offense, so I can understand that, but if you get a good base of knowledge and how a kid's decision making is lines out, especially at the high school level, I think that's the utmost importance. Now, you want a kid that's a prototype, 6'5", 235, can sling the ball all over the yard and make those NFL type throws. Yeah, for sure. But there's plenty of guys with strong arms that don't make good decisions, and if you do that, you're not gonna last in this offense very long, because you're gonna get exposed.
Absolutely. Then the second part of that is, I think early on, and maybe this was part of why it was such a slow burn to get the air raid in here, you got busts in the NFL, kind of like Tim Couch and Brandon Weeden, Johnny Manziel. There was this perception that they couldn't succeed. If they were an air raid, it was more of a gimmick and a system. But lately, you got Jared Goff, Case Keenum, a couple great seasons. I know Houston, you mentioned. Nick Foles came from an air raid style. And then, of course, Patrick Mahomes, mentioned him once again. The best season you could have even imagined, 50 touchdowns, 5,000 yards, ridiculous. They've all found some crazy success. So what do you think's different now, and should this bust notion kind of be put to rest once and for all?
Well, I don't even, the bust issue was always kind of bothering me because it was always kind of he's a system guy,
right?
And that term never really made sense to me because everybody's a system guy. You grow up in a system, play in a system, you're that system's guy. So that really never made sense to me. But I think you're starting to see, especially with the success of that Case had too, these past couple years, and especially with Pat, I think those coaches, and I give Andy Reid a lot of credit because I think I read somewhere where, when he finally decided Pat was going to be the guy, Pat had a lot of say in kind of the stuff that he liked doing, and I think when you play to the skill set of your quarterback, I think that ultimately makes your team better. If he's comfortable with what you're doing and not being as rigid, like, okay, we're going to West Coast and we're going to 7-step, 5-step, 3-step drop and all this stuff. And we're going to pound the rock with power and counter, and then we're going to take a play action shot. Well, yeah, all of that's great stuff, and I love it. But, Pat Mahomes is Pat Mahomes, and he's got a strong arm, and he's going to make some unbelievable plays, but he's comfortable with the concepts because he grew up with some of this stuff. He's been running these, it's not like Andy Reid just opened up a new playbook and he had to learn all that stuff. Obviously, he had things he had to do that Andy had, but some of those things he's been doing for his whole life, and I think that's why you kind of see that success with him certainly being able to have a say with what he's comfortable with, and especially with those type of athletes, getting them in space, he's definitely comfortable with that.
Absolutely, and I think your perfect segue to the next question was, if the QB is going to succeed, they need some weapons to throw to. So what kind of makes the ideal air raid wide receiver? What does it ask of their wide receivers, and what types really find the most success in this scheme?
Well, just, obviously, I think for us, recruiting-wise, you always we're going to recruit at least 4 to 5 receivers every single year, but you want the 4 best, 5 best guys you can get. But, there is a certain – you want guys to be tough over the middle. Those are some of those Y-cross mesh stuff where those guys are going to be going over the middle. I think, if we're going to talk about Kliff, I think Larry Johnson would be a perfect guy for that. I think some of the stuff that he can do, running 4 verts and having to play over the middle or seam read and sit down in holes, guys that are pretty savvy finding grass or finding leverage and finding holes within an offense. And then you also got to go find some guys that are blazers too. You got to go find some guys that can take the top off the defense, running verticals and posts and all that good stuff. And I think you also have to play with a good back too. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of this offense predicates on being able to defend all 5 eligible receivers and including the back. So if you got a really good back, and I think you see that a lot more in the NFL, guys being able to get out of the backfield and catch the football. If you got something like that, you're going to be in good shape with this offense.
Yeah, you almost just answered my next question of this overall painting the whole picture before we dive into the Arizona specifics. But the running back, obviously as a pass catcher, you mentioned they got to get out, they got to be sound route runners and good pass catchers. In terms of just as a sheer runner, what does the air raid do for a running back? Is it beneficial, or do they kind of get forgotten ever in terms of rushing the ball?
Well, I think the way that it is beneficial, at least in college football, is that you're defending sideline to sideline, right? So we're spreading you out and we're creating gaps and we're creating holes just based on space and leverage. So we may not have, a ton of run concepts in our offense, but just by spreading you out by alignment, we're creating a lot of space and a lot of gaps for us to just block you up and then hit it vertical. So I think in that way, it's beneficial for running backs, and then I think them, the defense having to be threatened by our back getting out of the backfield and catching a bunch of balls helps in the run game as well. So they got a lot of stuff to think about, and a lot of that's the defenses have been scratching their head for a lot of the time, and because I'm an offensive guy, I always like to say we're 10 years ahead of all the defenses, and they got to catch up. But it's about creating space and creating leverage and letting your playmakers make plays.
Awesome. So thanks for painting that overall picture of the air raid. Now we want to talk about Kingsbury, who clearly you have some experience. You said you played under him at Houston. Is that what it was? Or? Yeah,
recruited and played under him my whole career there from 2009 to 2012. So shortly before he took off for A&M. So it was a special time to be there. I was with Dana Holgrenson is obviously a huge name and back at Houston now, and Kevin Sumlin, who was at A&M with Kliff and now at the University of Arizona. So it was a really good time to be there, set a bunch of records and won a lot of games, and something proud to be proud of for sure.
Oh, that's awesome. Do you have, before we get into the actual football stuff, do you have a funny or just interesting Kingsbury moment or story that just sits with you and sticks with you? It's like, this was my favorite moment of Kliff Kingsbury being with him?
No, it's I got a lot of good, funny stories. I think the two that I like to tell the most was I remember one day at practice. It was like a hot, fall camp practice. Everybody was pretty miserable. It's day, 10 or 11 of fall camp. Everybody's starting to kind of drag. And I just remember, we stopped practice and they opened the gate from our practice fields onto there was a street that ran by our practice fields. And they opened the gate from the street and an ice cream truck comes driving onto the field. And everybody was kind of like, what's going on? Comes out in the middle of practice. Everybody moves out of the way, starts throwing ice cream out to all the players and stuff. And it was one of Kliff's buddies that set that up, and Kliff kind of asked him if he'd come drive the ice cream truck out onto the field to help us out on a hot Houston day. So, and I always like to tell that story because that's kind of who Kliff is. He's a player's coach that gets it. He'll grind you, but he'll also take care of you, and that was always something that I kind of appreciated about him.
That's awesome. In terms of him going to the NFL, do you think he's going to go full-born air raid offense to the fullest? What do you expect he's going to roll out there in Arizona?
Well, I think that'll be kind of interesting because especially over the last few years at Tech, I think you kind of saw him integrate a little more, pro style, but kind of, integrate what he was doing with what some of the pro guys were doing. And, he used the tight end a little bit more, which was kind of opposite of what we're doing here at WSU. We don't play with a true tight end, but incorporated some more run game stuff, which I thought was really good. And more formations, more motions, something to kind of dress up the base scheme of the offense. And what I think is really good, because now, they really can't get a beat on what you're doing if you're mostly vanilla 10 personnel stuff. But really interesting and really, really cool to see his progression over the last couple years. And I think he'll kind of take that into Arizona, especially with him hiring Sean Kugler. I think that was a pretty good hire by him as his offensive line coach and help out with some of the run game stuff too. So that'll be pretty cool to see how he molds those two worlds together.
And that was the next question. You're reading my mind here. I was going to mention, in terms of fantasy football, which is the podcast we're doing here, David Johnson's definitely the most prominent fantasy figure there in Arizona. We got, 6'1", 225 bruiser, very versatile, great receiving back. I know you've already kind of hinted that that's important here. He had a pretty injury-ridden, ruined 2017, uninspiring 2018, and a real just crap offense there with Mike McCoy. But what could this do for him? He's literally 2 years removed from 2,100 total yards, 20 touchdowns, 80 receptions, that no-brainer number one workhorse back that every fantasy owner was craving. Can he get back there? How does he fit into this air raid offense? And what do you think we can expect from him now?
It's interesting, and kind of like you said, I think he's a good example of the type of back that you would need. He is the bruiser, bigger type of back that can put his nose down and get you those tough yards. But he's an excellent guy in the pass game too. Route runner. He's an excellent route runner. He's also good in the screen game. A back that can catch some screens and make guys miss in the open field. I think that you got a guy like that can be pretty invaluable. And then like I mentioned earlier, guys like Larry Fitzgerald and Christian Kirk, some of those guys that, are excellent receivers in space and can find holes and stuff like that. But, especially, with David Johnson, I think that's a huge plus for those guys. Yeah, is
Kliff going to resurrect him? What do you think?
I think so. I got faith in him. I think obviously, I was telling you with that story, he's a player's coach, and he's always motivating his guys and get the best out of them. And I think if you give him some of those type of guys that they do have on offense, I think he's going to make the most out of them. And I'll be obviously really pumped to watch how it all unfolds.
Absolutely. And of course, at the center of it all is, again, the quarterback. And Josh Rosen's hideous rookie season. I mean, pathetic 55%. You said the most important trait is that decision making, the high accuracy. And you even said it can't be at 55, 60. You got to be closer to that 65, 70. Well, he is 55%, 5.8 yards per attempt, 11 touchdowns, and 14 ints across 14 games. Just as pretty awful as can be. Can he turn it around in this scheme and under Kingsbury? Do you think he can succeed, or is he just not going to be the guy?
Well, I think so, and I was actually at WSU here for Josh's last year at UCLA, so I got to watch some tape on him. Obviously strong arm, compact throwing motion. I think he gets the ball out quick, and I think what's going to help him is Kliff obviously played the quarterback position. Kliff played in this offense, has coached in it for a long time now, and had some dynamic offenses, and obviously had to develop quarterbacks. It wasn't like a lot of them weren't well-known household names in recruiting, even when he was recruiting them. So I think he understands how the quarterback position is played. I know he's a good coach. I know he can relate to what Josh's strengths are. And I think the other saving grace, I think, too, is Josh has kind of played in some of these schemes before, coming out of California. I know they did some of this stuff while he was in high school. They even did some of this stuff while he was in college. So it's not going to be anything new to him. And I think some of the decision making, you'll see that improve because it's stuff that he's comfortable with. And then also think too, as the players get better, offensive lines get better with a couple years in the system too. So I think if they can protect him, I think you'll see, the offense definitely be a little more dynamic. That's for sure.
Absolutely. If he's even the guy under center. So the next question after that is, and I'm sure you've seen some of these rumors, Kingsbury himself, when he was coaching and about to face Oklahoma, says Kyler Murray, I'd take him with the first pick in the draft if I could. He's dominant. I would take him first overall. And conveniently, Arizona has the first overall pick. He's going there now. And all the rumors are starting to churn because of that comment. And even Steve Keim, their GM there, goes, Rosen, yeah, he's the starter for sure for now. Just not putting it to bed by any means. So the rumors are flying. Many NFL sources at the Combine reportedly were saying they think the Cardinals are targeting Kyler Murray. What are your thoughts? Do you think there's some chances that happens? And if you were Kliff, what would you do?
It's a good question. I don't know. I think he's a smart guy. He'll take a look at the needs of the team and make the best decision for their organization. I got faith in him to do that. But Kyler's a great player. I think he's a very dynamic. You saw what Lincoln did with him at Oklahoma. There's some of the stuff that he's able to do. Throwing the football and running the football. I think he's obviously a kid you got to take a look at. And I don't think you can necessarily say we're gonna take Kyler but if there's another need at defensive end, I know Bosa was mentioned too, or maybe try to upgrade at O-line or trade the pick and get even more picks. I think Kliff will do. He's a smart guy. He'll do what the organization needs and definitely set himself up to have the best chance. But yeah, I think if it was me, I gotta. I always said it's better to have the most competitive position be your quarterback position because that only helps the team. So if that's drafting another guy and making that room as competitive as it can possibly be, it'll only help your team. So definitely got to take a look at it and we'll see how it unfolds here in about a month or so.
Yeah, very exciting. I'm hoping it happens, to be honest. It just seems too perfect of a fit with Kyler running a lot of those schemes in the offense, and it would just be electrifying. I think that's what that fan base would need. So we'll see. I hope he pulls the trigger and makes something happen. But
it'd be cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've already talked about Larry Fitzgerald, Christian Kirk, some of the receivers they have there. Otherwise, it's a pretty barren receiving core. And you've already kind of answered this one, but just to kind of reiterate, what could make those guys successful, both Larry Fitz and Christian Kirk? Obviously, both very strong in the intermediate game, a very strong route tree in that sense. Yeah. How could Kliff use those guys, and what do you think, what type of seasons will those guys have under Kingsbury?
Well, I think it was, I thought that was one of the coolest things Bruce Arians did with Larry a few years ago was kick him inside. I think his body type and his just unbelievable hands, I think kind of makes him the prototype
Yeah.
inside receiver in this offense because he can go over the middle. He's got strong hands. He's a bigger body who can handle, the wear and tear of banging off linebackers and safeties. But he's also a very savvy route runner too. He's able to find those holes. He's able to find those, that grass, and which obviously what we talk about all the time, finding the leverage and getting open in certain coverages and zones. And I think Larry's kind of perfect for that. And Christian, he's played in this offense. I think it won't be anything new to him. I think he's probably licking his chops more than anybody else because he understands, I'm probably going to get a ton of balls because I did at A&M. So I think he's obviously they recruited him for that offense. So he's a good player in his own right, but he'll be ready to go. I know from whatever position they want to put him at, but a guy that can run, he can put him outside and you can put him inside and be a savvy enough guy to find those holes like Larry. So Kliff, I think, is walking into a good position. Just got to get those guys going. That'll be fun to see.
If you were making the fantasy pick between those two, which one do you think has the bigger season? Do you have any projections you might put on either of them? Who's going to be the better option there, if you had to guess?
I don't know. Kind of an embarrassment of riches, that's for sure. But you can't. I like Christian. I think he does a really good job, but you can't count out Larry. For making the most catches and then just being a dependable guy too. I think especially with the young quarterback, and I said this last year to people, being able to depend on a guy like Larry Fitzgerald, he's going to run the right route, he's going to be open, he's going to make those tough catches for you. So a guy that a young quarterback can depend on, and that'll be pretty cool to see how he progresses.
Awesome, and that's obviously the most prominent offense, the Cardinals with Kingsbury there with the air raid right now. But there are some other teams starting to work it in. We mentioned Todd Monken, the air raid earlier, a huge success with it in the Buccaneers scheme last year. He's no longer calling plays. He's going to Cleveland, but he's going to have obviously some influence there with Freddie Kitchens scheming and game planning there. So if there's going to be any other kind of air raid 2.0, it might be the Browns. What do you expect of Todd Monken going to the Browns, and what do you think that offense as a whole, and especially Baker Mayfield, what do you think that could look like?
I mean, yeah, speaking of embarrassment of riches, those guys are, the lineup that they trotted out there those last 10 weeks was pretty impressive. I think Freddie Kitchens knows who he is on offense, and I really liked what he was doing, especially when he took over as play caller for Baker. But it can only help with Todd going in there and kind of relating on what works for them, and especially with Baker having played in this offense not only in college but in high school as well here in Texas. I think those three together in the quarterback room will probably be coming up with some good air raid stuff, and then obviously being able to do some of their run game that they incorporated, with the running backs they got now, especially adding Kareem Hunt. I think that'll only be just as effective, and it'll help open up some of that stuff within the pass game too. So definitely very scary, going forward for those dudes that are be playing Cleveland for the next few years.
Absolutely. I'm actually on record already of saying last year we called Mahomes. He was our fantasy 10th rounder. You have to take this guy. He's going to blow up. So not to toot our own home, but that one kind of blew up for us. And I'm saying already Baker Mayfield's going to be that quarterback. And a lot of it is the air raid. It's the unique principles, getting those guys deep down the field. I really think Baker's going to blow up. So I fully agree with you there. Do you see any other offenses, based on any coaches or trees or any of that, maybe injecting a little more air raid? That was probably the last question I got for you. I know I've been peppering you. But what do you think?
I think this kind of goes back to my original point about when it kind of infiltrates the NFL is I think you watch some of these guys that are playing in college football now. They've been doing some of this stuff for pretty much their whole lives, and it would only make sense that you would want to put your best players in the best position to make plays. And I can only see if I was smart enough to be a coach or a GM in the NFL to incorporate some of that stuff and put my players in the best position. So definitely see it could happen. And especially with the age of the type of quarterbacks that are in the NFL right now, I think we're seeing some of the youngest, brightest QBs that have ever played in the league, and they're more ready now than they've ever been. And you still got the legends out there like Tom, and they're still throwing the rock around in year 20. So I think it's important that, you take these players and what they're good at and what their skill set is and implement some of this stuff to help them. Definitely.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for the time, for the awesome interview. This was fantastic stuff. I think everybody is wondering about the air raid. This is as in-depth and great as you can get into it. So we really appreciate the time. Drew, if you want to give our listeners one last reminder where they can find you to interact and all that, would be fantastic.
Yeah, I got pretty much just on Twitter at WSU Coach Drew, and then definitely go follow the Cougs at WSU Coug FB. So definitely be looking out for that air raid if you want to come watch us play, and we'll be trying to win some games with this stuff for sure.
Awesome, man. Thanks again for the time. Much appreciated.
All right, appreciate it.